Welcome to this webinar on using multimedia to engage, inform, and lead learners. My name is Alan Shaughnessy. I am Professor of Family Medicine and lead a Master Teacher Fellowship. I also have a small production company that produces online medical education learning modules for practicing clinicians. And now we'll take a moment to run through the notices required for continuing medical education credit. Today I want to talk about a couple of educational psychology concepts that I use to develop both synchronous and asynchronous learning tools. These names, constructivism theory and cognitive load theory, may sound new to you, though you may not realize the ideas you use every day to produce your lectures and learning materials come from these theories. But this session is not going to be just about education theory. I'm also going to present the 11 rules based on empiric research that can help us make presentations better to help learners learn what we want them to learn. The science of e-learning and multimedia learning is quite robust. The first media comparison research was done way back in 1947, when the U.S. Army compared learning in a traditional classroom, instruction presented on paper, and instruction via a film on the topic. The rules and the evidence behind them are summarized in this book, which is described in the handout. I have several goals for this presentation. I hope you will be able to explain the theories of constructivism and cognitive load to someone else. I hope you will be able to take away several rules for using words and pictures to enhance learning. I also hope you will identify one or two new practices to try in your own teaching. What do I mean by multimedia learning? I'm not talking about fancy Pixar presentations full of animations with words flying onto the screen, or slides filled with piles of data, all on fancy backgrounds that feature your father's tie. Simply put, multimedia learning is using pictures, written words, and spoken words in presentations. The pictures, which can be illustrations, examples, or whatever, can be fancy animation or something held up in front of a class. However, there are ways of combining words and pictures that will enhance learner acquisition of new information, as well as help them develop a better understanding of the information. That's what I'll focus on today. Before I do, I need to explain what I mean by constructivism theory and cognitive load theory. Briefly, very briefly, constructivism is the idea that learning is a process of taking in new information and combining it with information existing in one's mind to create a unique understanding. It moves beyond the idea that learners' minds are blank slates that they write on, or that our minds simply record new information. Instead, learning consists of making sense of information. Knowledge, therefore, is constructed by the learner rather than conveyed by the teacher. Our job, therefore, as teachers is to help them construct this knowledge in their own minds. We are not in the knowledge transmission business, we are in the knowledge construction business. Jean Piaget was one of the first people to describe this idea, but John Dewey, considered to be one of the leaders in the early 20th century of education reforms we now take for granted, also pointed out that there was more to learning than simply acquiring new facts. Other educators you may have heard of include Jerome Bruner and Lev Vygotsky. They did their work with children, but it's only been in the last 30 years or so that their ideas have been applied to education of adults. The second theoretical framework is called cognitive load theory. Cognitive load theory uses the metaphor that humans have three types of memory. Information coming at us from the outside world hits our sensory memory, at which time it is either ignored or moved into working memory. At this stage, we decide whether it's important information. If it is, we process it by moving it into long-term memory. When we need the information again, it is retrieved from long-term memory and pulled into working memory for decision-making. There are several concepts in cognitive load theory that are helpful to teaching. These are the modality effect, the limitations of working memory, and schema formation. The first is the modality effect, meaning that we can get sensory information into working memory through two modes or modalities: auditory, or listening, and visual. When I say multimedia, I mean the use of these two modalities, words and pictures. The second concept is that working memory can only hold so many discrete chunks of information at one time before getting overwhelmed. This is the cognitive load. Too many brand new ideas can produce cognitive overload, resulting in decreased learning. The third concept is giving learners a way to organize information into a pattern. A schema, or internal representation of the world, can help them process new information more easily and faster. If they have a general concept in their long-term memory, this schema unburdens their working memory, since the schema represents just one chunk of information in their working memory. This concept of schema formation also undergirds illness scripts that we all learn. For example, when I say diabetes, each of us instantly activates from our working memory our diabetes schema. The exact schema are different in all of us, but they all have some core principles. No one listening will confuse diabetes with, say, rheumatoid arthritis. I think of schema as Christmas trees. For those of you who drag a bound tree off the top of your car and into the house, it looks like countless other Christmas trees in countless other living rooms. Then you begin to decorate it with ornaments and lights to make it your own. Similarly, each of us has a similar diabetes tree in our minds, though the decorations will differ. If you are a rheumatologist, your diabetes schema may be pretty sparse. If you are an endocrinologist, you may have a Christmas tree of diabetes weighed down by accumulated facts. Now, I want to transition for a moment into some of the issues with PowerPoint. I use the term PowerPoint generically since the same ideas apply to Google Slides and Apple Keynote. Simply put, these slide programs force us into a way of thinking that is simplistic, linear, and doesn't help learners construct knowledge. Imagine for a minute if Abraham Lincoln had PowerPoint. Here's an example of how he might have used PowerPoint, envisioned by Peter Norvig. If you want to learn more, Google Gettysburg PowerPoint to find out. So I'm Abraham Lincoln. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? My name is Abraham Lincoln. As you can see by this organizational overview, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget these awesome slides. The goal of a presentation is to exchange information between a speaker and audience. Even if the speaker is doing all the talking, audience members should be mentally interacting with the speaker through processing the information being presented. Visuals in presentations should help with that. The problem is that PowerPoint is designed solely to help the speaker, not the audience. It can easily be used as presenter notes rather than conveying anything in addition to the words being spoken. The many rules for PowerPoint slides emphasize putting as few words as possible on the slide, resulting in little additional information being conveyed to the audience. Here is a typical example of a slide. 90% of the screen is blank. Many slide presentations remind me of books designed to teach kindergartners how to read. Pictures, when used, are often fluff that have little to do with the concept being presented. The bulleted list used by many speakers help the speaker stay organized but result in simplistic, linear thinking rather than showing the interrelated aspect of most topics. Remember the Space Shuttle Columbia, which blew up less than 2 minutes after launch. Some researchers have blamed the use of PowerPoint presentations for obscuring the data on which the decision should have been made, leading to the devastating outcome. Learners, especially learners who will be tested, want to get the greatest bang from their educational time. They don't want to be entertained, they want to learn the material. That doesn't mean presentations shouldn't be entertaining. The goal, though, should be to keep their interest by the way we present the information. The Dr. Fox lecture is a case in point. Way back in 1970, an educator asked a group to evaluate the presentation of a Dr. Fox who presented on the application of game theory to psychiatric practice. Dr. Fox's presentation was given high marks. But Dr. Fox wasn't real. He wasn't a doctor. He knew nothing about game theory. He was an actor giving a lecture that was full of double talk, written by the researcher who made sure it didn't make any sense. The audience, though, didn't realize it. It's called educational seduction, in which a lecture can be entertaining but not valuable. The audience for Dr. Fox comprised practicing clinicians who would not be tested on the content. Students may not have been so entertained, though. Students enjoy lessons they can understand. When students can make sense out of a presentation, they tend to enjoy it. Irrelevant information or pictures can be distracting, directing their attention away from the main points, or it may disrupt their ability to create the sense-making linkages between facts. Students don't want or need mental breaks. They want to make sense of what we're saying. Okay, so now part 2, I'm going to transition to how to apply these concepts. We can use these theories to help students by structuring our presentations so that we help them apprehend the information, take in the new information we have to offer, and to comprehend the information, create an abstract conceptualization in their minds. In this way, we help them to organize the information we give them so that they can both recall it and apply it to new situations. I'm going to outline 11 rules for using words and media. These rules are described in greater detail on the handout. I've briefly outlined on the handout the research supporting these instructional design ideas, and there is more information in the book by Richard Mayer and the other resources I list at the end. The first set of rules involve using words and visuals together in a presentation to enhance learning and understanding. As I mentioned when I described the modality effect a few minutes ago, we can process information separately through auditory and visual channels. When I show a picture and describe it in words, most of us can get a greater understanding of the concept through the combination. Using cognitive load theory, anything that isn't supporting what is being said or detracts from the main visuals ends up increasing students' cognitive load, making it more difficult to form connections between what they see and what they hear. Therefore, we need to exclude interesting but irrelevant words, symbols, pictures, and sounds. Since I've just mentioned the rule, all that's needed on this slide is the rule number to keep you organized. The handout has all the information I want you to know about this rule, so I don't need to go over it now. Rule 2. People learn better when cues highlighting and thus organizing the essential material are added. Presentations with signposting throughout can help learners either build the Christmas tree or hang the decorations on the right branches. Throughout this presentation, I've tried to go back and forth between concepts and their application to help you connect the two. Stop periodically in your presentation to connect the new information you are presenting to the old. Rule 3. Pictures and spoken words work better than words alone by taking advantage of two information channels. Make sure the pictures represent a concept, organize the material, or illustrate an idea. The picture should not detract or be there simply to be decorative. Remove extraneous material. Rule 4. Pictures and spoken words work better than pictures and printed words. Written words have to be decoded and then processed via the auditory channel, slowing down processing. Rule 5. People learn better from graphics and spoken words than from graphics, spoken words, and written words. Written words are processed through the auditory channel, not the visual channel. So even though we are reading them with our eyes, our brains convert the image as if we were hearing the words. Rule 6. Words and pictures should be close to one another on the page. Captions for a picture or graphic should be within the graphic and not at the bottom. In this schematic, see how the words and pictures are together. Reading from left to right, I can see the blocks and arrows along with the words, processing them together as I move left to right. However, look at the same information presented another way. It's the same information, but at each step I have to go back and forth from the picture to the box, keeping the number, the picture, and the words from the box in my working memory at the same time. The cognitive load is much higher than when the pieces are labeled. Rule 7. Present pictures and narration at the same time. Do not put a picture on one page and the text or explanation after, or refer to a previous picture without showing it again. For example, if I were to go on to talk about information retrieval from long-term memory, I would need to show the picture again rather than have you rely on your memory of it. Now, the next concept I want to talk about is avoiding essential processing overload. There are some rules for minimizing cognitive overload of learners. Essential processing overload is the term used when the cognitive processing of the basic material is so demanding that learners have little or no remaining cognitive capacity to actually think about the material itself. So let's get rid of that graphic. That's better. As I said, essential processing overload overwhelms cognitive processing, so learners have little or no remaining cognitive capacity to engage in deeper processing of the material. As a result, they don't have the time or the ability to create linkages to previously learned information. Essential processing overload is likely to happen when the essential material is complex, the learner is new to the material, and the presentation is fast-paced. Rule 8. Present the information in segments that users can control rather than in a continuous unit. Presenting information in segments allows learners to control what is in their working memory. The use of pre-recorded presentations is great for this. Think of each screen as a segment of information that students can control. If they don't get the information presented on that screen, they can go back to review it again. Or use Canvas to deliver your information in bits less than 2 minutes long. You're talking to a generation of learners who don't remember a time when there wasn't YouTube and maybe even TikTok, so they are used to their information being in small chunks they can control. Rule 9. Pre-train learners by giving them the basic names and characteristics of what you will be talking about before you talk about them. Give an overview of the words and concepts before asking learners to interact with them in a complex manner. Start with the basics. In this lecture, I started with a set of words reflecting concepts: constructivism, cognitive load, modality effect, the memory structure, and others, before delving into them in detail. You may not have learned them all the first time I mentioned them, but by the time I talked about them within the context of these rules, you had already heard them once and could better process the ideas and their application when I got to them. The last two rules focus on making learning alone into a social event. Even before we had to resort to Zoom-based learning, learning was often a lone event. With Zoom and pre-recorded presentations, there is a chance to use a couple principles to help learners make sense of the presented material by providing social cues that lead to a stronger personal relationship between us and learners. Rule 10. People learn better when words are spoken in a conversational style rather than a formal style. Make it sound like you are talking to them as a conversational partner rather than talking at them. Use you and your and us rather than them to make the wording more conversational. But don't be too casual or colloquial. Rule 11. People do not necessarily learn better when the speaker's image is added to the screen. The idea here, again, is that it may result in extraneous processing. I spend a lot of time when I see someone virtually looking at their background and may not hear all they are saying. I showed my face at the beginning to connect with you, but my ongoing presence, other than my voice, isn't necessary the rest of the time. So, the handout presents 11 rules based on empiric research to create presentations that aid learners in their learning. I've tried to illustrate the principles in this talk, severely limiting words and using pictures to illustrate the concepts. You will find that sometimes it's tricky to avoid using words on slides. An accompanying set of notes, as I've given you today, helps communicate the details. Like the presentation, use the notes function to either list the topics you wish to cover or to script out the whole presentation.